the steps used to calculate your Social Security benefit? Well, here to talk with me about this is Jim Blankenship from Blankenship Financial Planning. Jim, welcome.
Good to be here.
Good to have you here. So you recently wrote an article about this very topic for Retirement Daily. Where you're going to have you walk us through these steps.
Sure thing. There are, as the article states, there's three primary steps to the overall process. The first is to get your average earnings over your lifetime, and it's actually an index of your average earnings. The second is to calculate the primary insurance amount, which is based upon that average indexed earnings that we came up with in the first step. And then thirdly, to calculate the actual Social Security benefit, which is based upon the primary insurance amount and your age at that particular time. So
yeah, sounds simple enough. Let's go back to step one, calculating your average earnings over your lifetime. You state that it's not as simple as just adding up your earnings and taking an average. Tell us more.
Right. So over time, inflation impacts the amounts of your various different earnings through the years. And the way that Social Security deals with this is they use a series of wage earnings or average earnings over your lifetime, and they set your earnings at your age 60, and then anything prior to that is a multiple of the earnings at your age 60. So for example, at age 59, it's going to be 1.0 something is going to be multiplied by what your earnings were during that year. That comes up with what we call an indexed earnings for that year. So we go all the way back to your age 22, and we compare the wage index at that point to the wage index at your age 60, and we multiply all of your different earnings, annual earnings, by those indexes to come up with an approximation of equality between the age 60 earnings and the earlier earnings.
Right. So when folks often hear that Social Security takes a look at the highest 35 years of your earnings to come up with this average index monthly earnings amount, tell us more about that. For instance, many folks wonder whether if you have a zero among those 35 years, whether that gets included in the calculation.
Exactly. So for most people, regardless of whether or not they have 35 years of earnings to report, they'll average their earnings over a 35-year period. So if you've had several 0 years in there, that'll of course bring down your average as if you were to leave those out. It would be a higher average, of course. But we take the highest indexed earnings after we went through the indexing process that we talked about, the 35 years of highest indexed earnings, and then we add those all together and divide by 420, which is 35 years times 12 months, because we're coming up with a monthly earnings amount.
So you also mentioned that the index stops at age 60. What happens after age 60 if you still have earnings between say 61 and 65, or full retirement age, or even age 70?
Right. So every year from your age 60 on forward is factored at a exact amount. It's 1.0 is our figure that we multiply by. So if you are still earning out to age 65, you don't get an index on those earnings. It just gets added in as the exact amount.
So once someone has calculated, or Social Security has calculated your average index monthly earnings, what comes next? What's step two?
Step two is that we calculate the primary insurance amount. This is often referred to as the PIA. This figure, once we get it, is actually equal to the amount of benefit that you would receive if you filed at exactly your full retirement age, which for folks that are, for example, reaching age 62 this year, they would have been born in 1960. That full retirement age is 67. For folks born a year or two earlier than that, it's going to be just a little bit less, down to a birth year of 1954, which would have you at full retirement age of 66. So the primary insurance amount, in order to calculate this, we use what are called bend points. And this is, again, getting into the technical pieces of Social Security, but the point is that there are bend points that were determined originally in 1977. They've been indexed annually over the years. And in 2022, the first bend point is 1,024. The second bend point is 6,172. So we have our average indexed monthly earnings amount. We take the first 1,024, which is the first bend point, and we multiply that by 90%. So the point is, for at the lower end of the earning spectrum, we're replacing 90% of the income in Social Security. From that 1,024 figure up to the 6,172, the second bend point, the amounts of income from your AIME are multiplied by 32%. And then anything above and beyond the 6,172 figure is multiplied by 15%. Those three figures are then added together, rounded down to the nearest dime, and this is your primary insurance amount.
So just a quick question about bend points. People are often told to go to mysocialsecurity.gov to get a sense of what their expected benefit would be. Is this something that folks can do at home to figure out whether the amount that they're getting reflects the actual AIME and the bend points that have been calculated?
Sure, it's possible. There's a lot of calculation involved with it. If you're good with spreadsheets, though, and if you like doing these kinds of things, I never met a spreadsheet I didn't love. So, of course, I don't mind going through these kinds of things, but for the average Joe, it's probably a more technical and complicated process than you would really want to get into. But if you like working with the numbers and such, yes, definitely, it's something you can go through and check their math and see how things come out.
Right. So the third step is to calculate your benefit based on your filing age.
Right. So we have our primary insurance amount. And now we determine, based upon our full retirement age, where we are on that spectrum between age 62 and age 70 that we would like to file. So anytime before your full retirement age, if you filed anytime before your full retirement age, your PIA is going to be reduced down to an amount reflecting your early filing. Anytime after your full retirement age, your PIA would be increased or multiplied by an increaser to come up with your actual benefit. Your PIA doesn't actually change. It's always the same, except that cost of living adjustments will apply to it, and any new earnings would be applied to it. But effectively, the PIA remains static, just depends on when you decide to file. So if you filed, for example, 3 years before your full retirement age, that would represent a 20% reduction to your benefits. So instead of $1,000, which is our example PIA, you would receive $800. On the other hand, if you decided to delay from age 67 to age 68, that $1,000 would be increased to $1,080 by an 8% factor.
So just a couple follow-up questions, Jim. One is when folks do look at their Social Security statement and they look at the PIA, a couple things to note perhaps. One is that if that number is a projection, assuming that someone keeps working, one, and two, it's a gross amount. It may not reflect the fact of what happens to your benefit if you're working and claiming before FRA. Doesn't reflect the fact that taxes may be taken from Social Security. It doesn't necessarily account for the possibility that you might be subject to WEP or GPO. Is that fair to say?
Right. There are a lot of potential reductions. And then on top of that, of course, Medicare will be taken out whenever you're 65 or older, and then you may have tax withheld. So the actual benefit that you receive is going to be something different, very likely. But yes, there are a lot of factors that can change that.
Yeah, but for planning purposes, having this grossed up number is as good as anything when you're trying to build a retirement income plan.
Exactly. Yes, that's probably your best place to start from, and then of course you know your own circumstances the best, and maybe there'll be maybe there'll be a surprise come up, but for the most part, you should have a pretty good idea of what your benefit can be.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I want to thank you for walking us through this. Anything we missed or anything that just bears reemphasizing before we wrap up?
Off the top of my head, nothing that I know of. It's a fairly straightforward process, but there's a lot of calculations involved. Like I say, if you like to work with numbers, you can go through this on your own. You can get an advisor, or there are a lot of software packages out there that will walk through this process for you.
Hmm. Well, Jim, thanks ever so much for writing for Retirement Daily, for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our viewers and our readers. It's greatly appreciated.
Always my pleasure.